Joel, you are a business leader, professor, and author. You are the founder of Peterson Partners and the former chairman of JetBlue. But I'm not here to ask you about real estate, private equity, or commercial airlines, although you are a titan in those industries. But here we're going to talk more about life lessons. And in our class, you've said, I've made the mistakes so you don't have to, so we can learn from your stories. What's a common mistake or pitfall that you see people make early on in their career?
They make themselves too important and they fail to put together a great team. Business is a team sport. One of the things you may remember from class, I said that every leader needs to help people be respected members of a winning team doing something meaningful. I had a number of job offers coming out of business school, and his was by far the lowest, and I immediately accepted it. I always tell people, don't take the job for the prestige or for the money. Take it for who you work with. I was an undergrad with Mitt Romney. We were classmates. And in graduate school, one of my section mates was Ray Dalio. And so I always compare myself to those two, and I feel inadequate. But I've learned to do less comparing. I used to tell my students that I loved them, but it creeped them out. And I said, no, you don't understand. This is like fiduciary duty is the business word for love, but it's really caring about others as much as you care about yourself. It's having a duty to them. You can love somebody by the way you listen to them, the way you act around them, and you can enrich their lives. And so that's what I mean when I tell students I love them. But I think they're just exceptional.
I love you too, Joel. Welcome to Cherie's Corner, a podcast where we dive into the topic of careers and hear from my friends and guests who are killing it in the business world, so we can learn from their lessons, their wisdoms, and their mistakes. I'm your host, Cherie, and last week I graduated from business school from Stanford University. Previously, I have experience working in tech and venture capital. Welcome to season 4 of Cherie's Corner podcast. I am so excited for this episode and this entire season. It is so good, you guys. In this episode, we're learning from the titan of the industry and one of my favorite professors at Stanford, Joel Peterson. Do you know how lucky we are? We get to hear about the peaks and the valleys of Joel's life and all the career wisdoms that he openly shares with us. I love chatting with icons like Joel because from the outside we can obviously see his career success. But understanding who he is on the inside, how he thinks, how he makes decisions, and how those decisions have got him to where he is today, what matters to him, that's what's really exciting to me. And I'm so glad we get to uncover and unpack that today in this episode. Let's dive in. Joel, thank you so much for taking the time to be on my podcast.
I'm delighted to be here with you.
I'm so excited to have you here.
It's fun. This is 2 years in a row.
Yeah, totally. What a pleasure and honor it's been to be in your class for my first and second year.
Yeah.
First year, it was by lottery. Second year, it was by me putting you as the number one slot and number one class that I had to be in.
How fun. Yeah.
Awesome. So I wrote an intro. Joel, you are a business leader, professor, and author. You are a husband, father of 7 children, and grandparent to over 30 grandchildren. You are the founder of Peterson Partners and the former chairman of JetBlue, the managing partner formerly for Trammell Crow, and you've served on the board of over 35 companies. You're like, nothing new. This is amazing life of accomplishment. You've taught at Stanford GSB for over 30 years, and you've written books on business culture and leadership. Whew. But I'm not here to ask you about real estate, private equity, or commercial airlines, although you are a titan in those industries. What I remember the most from our classes are not the business lessons, although I've learned a lot from you along the way. But here we're going to talk more about life lessons. And in our class, you've said, I've made the mistakes so you don't have to, so we can learn from your stories. So today we're going to dive in a little bit more of a focus on the life lessons that I've had the pleasure of learning over the last 2 years.
Great.
We can get started with some icebreakers. So something that I learned from you is that you walk 10,000 steps a day, which is remarkable. Sometimes I don't even make it to 3. And over the course of a week, doing this every day, you finish an audiobook every single week. How did you start doing this, and what are you listening to now?
So my kids came to me and said, Dad, you need to get some exercise. And they wanted me to lift weights and do a bunch of crazy things. And I said, I'm 77 years old. I don't need to be lifting weights. And so I said, but I will commit to walking. And 10,000 steps is a lot, and I didn't realize how long it would take. It takes me probably an hour and 20 minutes, hour and a half a day. And I have to just carve out that much time. And I would have a hard time doing it without an audiobook going in the background, or at least a phone call with my wife or something. So and that works out to about, if I do it 7 days a week, it's about a book a week. And so I've just connected the two.
Yeah.
And right now I'm reading one called The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt. And it's a great book.
Is it about my generation? Are we the most anxious?
It is, yeah. And a lot of it relates to social media and these smartphones and people being connected for hours every day to their smartphones and feeling the pressure and the anxiety. I also just finished one called Never Enough, which is a little bit about the high anxiety pressure on young people to get into the best schools and to achieve. And this whole achievement thing really makes them miss a life of play, a life of fun, a life of enjoyment. They're under pressure all the time.
Those sound like two really intense books. Do you feel more optimistic or pessimistic after listening to those?
Well, I feel concerned, so I've sent it to my kids, to think about raising their own children. We didn't have that problem with our kids.
Right.
But I think it is a real problem today.
True. Something to think about.
Yeah.
When did you start this tradition of walking 10,000 steps a day?
Well, I tried it for a while without the challenge of my kids and without the audiobook thing, and I found that I could do it a couple of days a week, and then a lot of days I'd fall off to 2,000 or 3,000 steps. And if I don't do anything, I'll probably get in 1,200 or 1,400 steps just getting around.
Right.
But it was really the challenge my kids gave me a couple of years ago that got me on just every single day. And I almost never miss now.
It's the social accountability. And I've seen you roaming around campus before. And I'm like, I bet he's listening to an audiobook and getting his steps in.
For sure.
Awesome. The next question in our icebreaker is, I was a student in your Engineering a Remarkable Life class. And that class boasts a waitlist of over 100 students. And in the business world, where money, fame, power, and influence are prioritized, and normal measures of success, you share a different philosophy of a person to be, someone to love, and work to do, which is the foundation of this class. How did you come up with the curriculum for this class, and why is it especially important for business school students to learn it?
Well, I think business school students have a unique set of tools. They're taught how to analyze situations, how to assess assets and liabilities and trends and make judgments, make bets. And I started thinking about what if the most important product they'll ever deliver to the marketplace, which is their own life, their own brand. And how can they be rigorous about that? How can they think about that? And I thought, that what we learned in business school is really valuable for crafting our own life. You can rewrite your operating system. I know there's debate today around whether or not people have free will. Do they have agency or not? My own life tells me that we have a lot of agency and we can influence outcomes. And so what I want to do is provoke people to think about that, give them tools and maps and ways to do that. It really came about because I was seeing students kind of spending time feeling like victims, and they were more interested in that than they were learning about how do I lead and manage? How do I become a great teammate? How do I make the world a better place? It was very self-interested, and I thought, do I really want to teach anymore? And so I actually considered stopping, just saying, this isn't really worth it. This generation doesn't really care about that. And so as I spoke out on these issues, several people thanked me for speaking up. And pretty soon the dean said, well, if you want to teach another class, you can do this. So I took him up on it, and I started teaching it. And it's an experiment, as you know. It changes every quarter a little bit because I'm learning right along with the students. And so that's the derivation.
Was there any convincing to the administration or to the deans that this was a class, Engineering a Remarkable Life. It's not finance, it's not accounting, it's not our operations class. It's a wholly new type of curriculum. Was there any pushback, or were they completely bought in from the very start?
The dean seemed to I told him that one of the things we're going to do is talk about how do you survive litigation? How do you survive a turnaround? Yeah. How do you survive? So one of the classes is about surviving reversals, betrayal, downfall, turnarounds. How do you survive that? And another one is about thriving. How do you thrive? How do you think about reconfiguring your life? How do you design a personal operating system that isn't the one that you just inherited from DNA or nurture, family, peers, teachers, etc.? And I think he was intrigued by it. And also I think he probably wasn't excited about me not teaching anymore. I think he felt like I've been around here. I mean, part of it is I've been around here for 32 years, and so I'm a little bit of a fixture. And so I think he didn't want me to leave kind of feeling bad. And so he said, what the heck, we'll give it a try.
Having taught here for 30 years, I think that the way that I would put it is you were a flagship part of this university and the students that come in and come out of it.
I'm a tugboat.
That's another way to put it. So don't you worry, I have a whole set of questions on surviving, because I thought that was one of the most poignant classes and lectures. And one of the quotes that I remember most vividly is that you said to students, rain will fall on your lives. Mm-hmm. And you said that, I think there was a pause in the class where we're all holding our breath, what do you mean? Life has been pretty good to us for the most part, up until this point. But as we go on for the next 50 years of our lives, things will happen both personally and professionally. And I really enjoyed the vulnerability and the lessons that came from that lecture. So we'll get into that.
Great.
Yes. So many of my listeners on YouTube, on Instagram and TikTok, social media platforms, they're go-getters and they're trying to plan out their careers. And you have this saying is that always have a plan. It can be in pencil, but always plan it out, and things may change, but you want to know what defines winning. I'm 28 now. When you were 28, what did your plan look like, and how has it changed since then?
I don't think I had much of a plan. I had a bunch of dreams and wishes and hopes, but I hadn't really converted them into a plan. Yet were there deliverables, time frames, it's announced, etc. And it really took me 3 children in to figure that I really had to have a plan, because I started to scramble. I was unable. I've written this book called Juggling Glass and Rubber Balls. And I realized that I was juggling these professional balls, which I call rubber balls, and I was juggling these children, which I consider glass balls. If you drop the glass balls, they shatter. If you drop the rubber balls, they generally bounce. And so how do you manage to do all this juggling? And I hadn't really quite figured it out at that point in time. So it was of necessity that I really said, wait a minute, I've got to have a plan. So I was a slow learner.
And what was the first part of you figuring out how to juggle glass and rubber balls?
I think the first thing for me was meeting my wife and seeing that she had a different approach to raising children, and realizing I had a lot to learn. And so kind of going to school on her and learning a new value system and mimicking her, learning from her. And I learned a lot of really important lessons just by being around somebody who had a better skill set than I did.
I like it. It's like the complementary skill set and also supporting one another in that way.
Very much so.
And so once you created a plan with Diana, how often does that plan change or get revised?
Probably daily, hourly. You're always adjusting. The military talk about every battle plan survives until it has contact with the enemy, and then you adjust and you survive. So not that your children are the enemy or that the school is the enemy, but there are events that happen in life that it means you have to adjust. I think you can have an overall framework, however, that survives. So we had one for our entire lifetime raising our children. The framework did not really change. The particulars changed all the time and were adjusted, refined, cut back, grown, exaggerated, etc.
At the end of Engineering a Remarkable Life, this class, we had to create our plan, write it out. I think it was, over 10 pages, and send it to you as an social accountability partner. And the first part of this plan is that we had to take into account our personal assets and liabilities, which was a really interesting framework to start with. I had never thought about my life in that way, taking an accounting framework and applying it to my life. Like, what are the things that, what are the assets and liabilities of my life?
Right.
So I
non-financial ones.
Non-financial ones, right. Including the personnel, the people in our lives that bring us up, or, the baggage that we may come with.
Right.
Which was really interesting to consider that everyone has a different starting point.
Right. And we have both. We have assets and liabilities, and often they're quite connected. Mm-hmm. Our liabilities are mirror images of our assets. Mm-hmm. We overcompensate and undercompensate, and so it's a whole, but it is made up of nature and nurture, and you're some combination of those two. And then the question is, how much free will do you have to adjust both of them? And my thesis is that over time, your agency has a greater and greater impact as you rewrite your operating system. Mm-hmm. And so I love the quote by Dwight David Eisenhower, who said, "Plans are nothing, planning is everything." Mm-hmm. So that's why I ask students, put your plan together, but in pencil. In other words, feel free to erase it and change it. But always have a plan. Have an idea of where you're headed. It goes to that question that you mentioned, is what is winning? Mm-hmm. What is winning in your life? What would you like to see happen? What is your objective? What are you solving for?
Yeah. Could you give an example of some of the assets and liabilities that you thought of when you were creating your plan from the beginning?
So I realized that my assets and my liabilities were related. One is that I was pretty egocentric. I was kind of selfish, and that made me somebody that was not afraid to do things because I was overconfident. And so that was at one level an asset, but at another level it was a little bit offensive because I came to conclusions quickly, and so I realized that was an asset and a liability. I needed to change that. Another one was that I was emotional, and my emotions, buried within those emotions, were some instincts. I had a sense about things, and I believed in my gut instinct. Well, that's an asset at one level, to be instinctive. At another level, it makes you overly emotional, and you conclude things too quickly. Another one for me was that I was blaming. I held people accountable, which was good for managing things, but if things didn't go right, I would be harsh and hold people accountable. So I came up with mantras that I said, I've got to rewrite my operating system. So I basically said, it's not about me to overcome my egocentricity. I am not my emotions to overcome my emotional nature, and I have all I need. And that calmed me down and let me realize I can't blame other people. I have what I need to be successful. I don't need to beat other people up or beat myself up. And I, for me at least, I had to say those mantras to myself many times for the next decade before I really had internalized them. Mm-hmm. And I really am now much calmer. I'm much less egocentric. I'm more interested in what other people think and feel, and I learn more from it. So those were, at one level, they were assets as a young person. They allowed me to go out and take a bunch of risks and do it. On the other hand, as I became older and more in charge of other people's success, they were liabilities. So I wanted to rewrite them.
I love that. It's so self-reflective and also very actionable.
Yeah.
Here are the assets, and here's, on the flip side of my assets, come some liabilities, and here are the ways that I want to rewire some of the liabilities that I may have. And I know a fourth mantra you have is, I am grateful.
Right.
And one that you say quite often. I've told you this story in class, but just to share, I was going through a really hard time last summer. I might cut this part out, but I was going through a breakup. Mm-hmm. And it was particularly rough for me. And I should probably show you this, but I have a journal where every single day I would write those 4 mantras. This was before the class, before I created my own.
Yeah.
I borrowed yours. And over 20 days of just rewriting those 4 mantras that I borrowed over and over again until I felt grounded.
You owned them.
I owned them.
Yeah.
I owned them.
That's what happened to me. It took me longer. But
We were going through different things
Yeah.
at different times, but it's so funny. The journal, I mean, there's like some of my thoughts in there, but by most of the journal entries are just those 4 things every single day. And the fact that I can turn the page and see over 20 almost consecutive days of writing the same thing over and over again. You would think I was a crazy person if someone had read that.
Yeah.
But it really helped.
I don't know what it is, but there's something about repetition.
Yeah.
And particularly if you think about it when you write it. I think I mentioned this class. I came to the I'm Grateful when I was talking to a brother of mine who had brain cancer. And I asked him how he was doing, and he said, it was the best thing that ever happened to me. And I thought, no, wait a minute, did I hear that right? And he said, no, I appreciate every person. I appreciate every conversation I have. I appreciate every challenge. I now am grateful for everything. And I thought, oh my gosh, how can I not be, I have all my faculties. I have every chance to do everything. I need to be grateful. And so I got rid of this acquisitive, anxious, acquiring, wanting, striving thing to just back off and say, I am grateful. It was very therapeutic.
Yeah. A quote that I think about is, a healthy man or woman wants everything. An unhealthy man or woman wants one thing.
Interesting.
The next question is on career and career pitfalls. So you've seen hundreds of successful and perhaps unsuccessful entrepreneurs through the GSB and also through Peterson Partners. What's a common mistake or pitfall you see that you see people make early on in their career?
It's almost infinite that what people can do, but I think a lot of it relates to they're not responsive to the marketplace. They're not listening. Reality, they have an idea that trumps reality, and they fail to put together they make themselves too important, and they fail to put together a great team. Business is a team sport, and I think in order to attract other people, you have to be a great team member. You have to rely on others. You have to listen to others. You have to recruit others, assign them the right thing, give them feedback, promote them, make them matter. One of the things you may remember from class, I said that every leader needs to help people be respected members of a winning team doing something meaningful. And if you can remember those 3 things, the odds of putting together a great team. A lot of entrepreneurs have an idea. An idea is not a product, and a product is not a business, and a business is not an enduring enterprise. And so if you remember, I'm about building an enduring enterprise, then you don't get caught up in feeling egocentric about things. You really say, wait a minute, my job is to put together a team and a culture and win together.
Prioritizing people and removing ego. It's so interesting. I feel like nowadays, as we see some of the companies or cults of personality, many of the tech leaders in Silicon Valley, I think that it is very much egocentric. And it works perhaps in the short term, but we'll see in the long term how that plays out.
Well, and then I think you have to think about, what are you really solving for? If you're solving for a happy, peaceful, joyful life, you may achieve. I have a number of friends who found all kinds of pleasure and success and power, fame, money, glory, whatever, and then they're divorced, their kids are on drugs, they're they spend their whole lives looking for the answer. And I think really what you really want in life is peace. You really would love to come to this place where your relationships are rich and deep and peaceful. There's nothing that compares with having great relationships with other human beings. We are social animals.
I mean, at the GSB, so many of my classmates, myself included, we're so type A and we're strivers right now in our lives, especially as we're graduating. We're looking to the next thing. What's next in our career? And I think it's really challenging to come to a conclusion to say what I have is enough when we're looking to the next thing?
Yeah, I think the trick is to both be a thriver and a striver. I was very lucky in that I married a thriver. Diana is this amazing human being for sending roots deep and building relationships and being patient. I'm impatient. It goes along with the characteristics I described before. And she's infinitely patient with others. And so I watched her raise our children applying these things. And I said, I need some of that in my life. So we basically looked at our own upbringing and got rid of some of the things that I did and got rid of some of the things she did and developed our own family culture that tried to take the best from both of our backgrounds. And so I think that's one helpful thing.
Yeah.
I'm not here to help people select spouses or life partners.
Although any advice on that front would be very helpful for me.
Yeah, for everybody, really.
Yes.
Yeah, unfortunately, you make that at an age where you don't have much life experience. It's tricky.
Yeah, they say the most important financial decision you make is who you marry.
In every way, emotional. I mean, it's the most important decision you'll ever make is who you marry.
No pressure.
Yeah, no pressure.
Joel, you've served as the chairman of many boards, and very notably JetBlue. I read online that this opportunity came up from a student. Can you share the origin story there? And was it an immediate decision to join the board? And what did you hope to learn?
So it was a former student who had made a private equity investment to back this new airline. It was called New Air at the time. And they realized that one of the things they would have to do would be to build a terminal out at JFK. And they looked around the board and they saw nobody had ever built anything. And I'd run a big real estate company, so I was familiar with the construction world. And so they asked me if I would join the board. And I said, well, I have to have a certain minimum investment in order to join the board. And so they had to cut back on their investments to let me come in. And I was really interested not so much in what I could learn, but could I add value? Was there something I could do to add real value? And I really figured that building a project on time, on budget, and well-designed for the long run, well-financed and everything was a kind of a unique thing that I could add. And so I brought it in on time, on budget, and then about a year or so later, I got asked if I would serve as chairman. And so I thought, well, JetBlue is flying in the wrong direction right now. We were running out of cash. We had a big book of debt. And so my question then was, this is kind of a turnaround. We have to do a bunch of things to get JetBlue in the right place. And so I had to say, is this something that I'll be uniquely qualified to do? So I think, in my way of thinking about things, is always less about what can I learn, what can I get out of this, than it is what can I add? What difference can I make? Can I add something that's unique and different? And if not, then I'm past the point of wanting to maximize what I get out of it. Because I think about Stanford here. If I were to think, what do I get out of this? It wouldn't work. It's not for the money. It's not for the prestige. I'm an adjunct, so it's not for prestige. I don't get tenure. None of those things. But it's really for the students. Can I make a difference in the lives of these remarkable young people? And if I feel like I can, then this is what I want to do.
I would sum that up in saying that it's a giver mentality.
It is. You've probably read the book Givers and Takers, and I think it's a really important notion. Adam Grant wrote that.
I guess this philosophy of giving back, people might have that desire to want to give back, but it might be super daunting that they might not have the wherewithal or the know-how of how to do that. And as you were joining the board, leading the board of JetBlue, were you at all concerned that you're like, I don't have experience in the commercial airline space, although the real estate business was a nice dovetail into it? Did that at all faze you?
Well, I realized I was behind the eight ball when it came to the airline industry. I really didn't know anything about it. In fact, commercial real estate you lease every 5 or 10 years, whereas the airline business you lease it up every few hours. So, but they're both capital intensive. The nice thing about real estate is you can move your assets from one airport to another. With real estate, you're stuck in one piece. But there are a lot of similarities. And I really figured I knew something about turnarounds. I knew something about culture. I knew something about building great teams. And I figured that's what was needed at the time. So I felt like I could make a difference. So
leveraging what you do know instead of focusing on the places where there's room to grow.
You know, Cherie, I think everybody wants to matter. I think that's really a very common thing. And you know, since we all want to matter in our lives, doing something that is needed helps us to matter. But once you realize that other people want to matter too, then you can say, my job is to help them matter, to help them understand how much they are loved and appreciated. And so the more that you go around, and it sounds a bit Pollyanna, but helping people know that they are loved and appreciated. You know, credit is infinitely divisible, and there's no reason not to give credit to people, to share credit. And so to me, that's what you have. That's the opportunity you have when you're given a leadership thing. And I think anytime you say, well, what's in it for me? I think you're missing the point.
It's so interesting well, I think that's like an ideal person to work with, work for, or also hire. It's really hard to find those people, or even just be close to those people, the people who are givers and have more of generosity of spirit within them. How do you find that? Or how do you naturally seek that out, or get close to those people?
Well, if you find one, hug up to them, get close to them. I mean,
don't let them go.
Don't let them go. It's a little bit like my advice on a mentor. You can't ask somebody to be your mentor, but if you find somebody, you can mimic them. You can have mentors living and dead. You know, I mean, to me, Winston Churchill was a mentor. I really admire he was a deeply flawed human being, but an amazing person that was able to deal with the toughest problems in the world. So if you find that kind of a person in literature, or not in literature, in history, you know, get close to them. But if you find them in real life, it's gold. I early on met this fellow Trammell Crow, who was an amazing human being. And I remember I had a number of job offers coming out of business school, and his was by far the lowest. It was, I think, 50 or 60% of my next highest offer, and I immediately accepted it. And I just said, this is a mentor. This is somebody that I can learn from, and he has that generosity of spirit. And so I immediately accepted the job, even though it was by far my lowest one. And it was in Texas, and I'd never been to Texas.
I hear from mentors all the time that it's really important that we prioritize who we work with and who we work for, and especially when it comes at a cost of potential prestige or potential salary cuts. So I love hearing that story of you prioritizing the people over other things.
Yeah. I always tell people, don't take the job for the prestige or for the money. Take it for who you work with, because you'll learn that. They'll be your protectors. They'll advance your career. You'll learn things. Life is long. Life is a marathon. It's not a sprint. And I've seen people run the numbers that say, well, if you take a job at X and you could have had 1.1 times X, in 20 years that difference turns into some other number that's huge. And I've just thought, what a fallacious argument. You know, go where you can make a difference, and you'll make a difference, and great things will happen.
I think I love that philosophy, but quite honestly, when I was coming out of undergrad at 22 and had student debt, that was not the philosophy that I was running with. And it was very much, and the peers that I was talking to, we were all, comparing our base salaries, how much equity we got. That was more the conversation rather than who we would be working with. I would say that was priority 3 or 4, but now as I've grown in my career, 5 to 6 years later, who we're working with day in and day out is infinitely more important.
It kind of comes back to this never enough book that I was saying. When you have that never enough mindset, you tend to go towards, what's my salary, what's my equity, what's my title, and it's never enough. Mm-hmm. You're always dissatisfied, and you're always looking over your shoulder. And what you get to a certain stage in your life is this new place, which says, there is enough. I have enough. Mm-hmm. And my happiness, my peace, my ability to add value, those things become more important. It takes a certain level of experience to get to that point. And so I think the early striving may be fine for a while, but I think you have to keep it in a box or you'll destroy yourself.
That's also on theme with people who anchor their self-worth on qualitative measures or quantitative measures.
Right.
Striving for, the next promotion or the next milestone. It can be very exhausting at the end of the day.
So I'll tell you a funny story. I may have said this in class, but Irv Grossbeck and Irv is a legend around the Stanford Business School. And
I haven't taken a class with him.
He's amazing.
Yeah,
he's just amazing. In any event, he and I were invited by, I think, a 10th year reunion class to be on stage and answer whatever questions. And so we kind of went back and forth. And students would ask him a question, he'd give an answer, and then I would add anything that I wanted, and then vice versa. So they asked the question, who do you compare yourself to? And I answered, well, I was an undergrad with Mitt Romney. We were classmates. And in graduate school, one of my section mates was Ray Dalio. Mm-hmm. And so I always compare myself to those two, and I feel inadequate. And then it was Irv's turn, and he said, Teddy Roosevelt said, comparison is the thief of joy. And I compared my answer to his, and I felt terrible. His answer was so much better. But I've learned to do less comparing.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, it's funny that you bring up, Mitt Romney and Ray Dalio, they're titans in the industry.
Right.
But you're also a titan in your industry as well, in real estate and also, commercial airlines, everything we've talked about. I guess having known them from a young age, were you able to predict their success? Or
I think with Mitt I could because, he was he grew up in Bloomfield Hills, went to Cranbrook, came to Stanford, Harvard Business School and Harvard Law School. His father was governor, and so he really was born on third base.
Many assets.
Yeah, he really had lots and lots of assets. So I think I could have predicted that one. Plus, he was tall and handsome, and I hated that about him because I was not tall nor handsome. But Ray Dalio and I were both fresh out of undergraduate school, and we didn't go to Yale, Harvard, or Princeton. So we went to lesser schools, and we came directly to Harvard Business School, and I think we were probably considered by our section mates the dumbest people in the class, the least likely to succeed. And he was just around the corner from me. He lived right around the corner from me, so I got to know Ray really well. So I would not have guessed that, but looking back on it, I can see that it was in him. I don't think anybody could see that it was ever in me.
I doubt that. I'm so curious. Were there characteristic traits that you saw at that time within yourself, or you think within Ray that,
Within Ray, I saw focus. I mean, he knew what he wanted to be at age 12. He was been trading stocks from the beginning. He understood more. In fact, he was a technical trader. And so he would look at these head and shoulders kinds of movements of stock and predict the next thing based on what had happened in the past. And I thought, this is total nonsense. This guy will never succeed. And I remember doing a presentation with him in front of the class, and I had to make part of the presentation was technical trading and shorting stocks based on technical things. And I thought, this is such utter nonsense. This poor guy will never succeed. And so how wrong was I? I was much more of a fundamentalist.
Well, it's so funny. We have our class superlatives coming up soon as we're graduating in a few weeks, and we have to vote for, most likely to be the class billionaire. And we also have one that's most likely to be the class, who is most the class clown, and I wonder who that will be, because maybe they'll surprise us all in the next 30 years.
Yeah, I'm sure they will.
Yeah.
I'm sure they will. A lot of the ones that I would have thought would have been super successful were not. And I think that's true in most classes. Every once in a while you can spot somebody who's just on their way. It's a Mitt Romney, where you say, gosh, this guy's got everything and he's just ahead of everybody. But I think there's a lot of quiet people run deep. You know, they're introverts. And,
with a lot of focus.
With a lot of focus, a lot going on, and over time they wear well.
I guess last question in this realm. Now that you are in these circles, Joel, I'm so curious. What are the types of conversations, of the titans of the industry?
It's interesting how little is about that. You want to know them personally, their interests. You want to know their families. You want to know. Sometimes it's about vacations or whatever. I remember I took Mitt and Ann Romney on a cruise in the Caribbean and got to know them. And at the evening meals, we would say, we'd have a discussion topic. And I remember one of them, I said, if you weren't doing what you're doing now, what would you like to be doing? And at that point in time, Mitt was basically turning around Bain, not Bain Capital, Bain Consulting. They were in a bunch of trouble. And I was turning around the Trammell Crow Company. And when we came to him, he'd said, I'd like to be a janitor. I said, why is that? And he said, you get done sweeping the halls and polishing the floors, and it's done, and it looks great. And they came to me, and I said, I'd like to be a gardener. You pull the weeds out, and you water them, and everything looks great. And we both were dealing with really messy, complicated situations that never over, and we yearned for being a gardener or a janitor where we could just get the work done.
Yeah.
And, so that was probably not responsive to your question.
No, I love that story. It shows, it goes back to the basics.
Yeah.
The conversations go back to the basics where it's about the people.
About life and people and
our humanity.
Yeah. What are we learning?
Yeah. So going back to resilience and how we talked about surviving. In one of our classes, you mentioned that we learn more from life's valleys than we do our peaks. How did you come about this saying, this ideology, and what have you learned from your valleys?
I certainly didn't come to it going through the valley the first time. Valleys are scary. You don't know what's going to happen. They feel distressing. You're not sure of the outcome. And so I went through being fired and sued in 3 jurisdictions. It lasted for 3 years, and it meant moving, selling our dream home. It meant starting over. It meant a whole bunch of terrible things. Had you asked me at that time what I was learning from the valleys, I would say, don't ever go into the valley. This is terrible. A number of years later, I remember apologizing to my kids because I moved them back into a rental property that was being torn down. They had to start over in new schools and everything. And I said, guys, I am so sorry for what I put you through when we went through that. And they said, Dad, it was the greatest years of our lives. When you were with us, you were totally with us. It was just incredible. And I saw them learn lessons and develop a resilience and a grit that they would not have learned had they been on a paved road, something that was easy for them. So that was the first time I sort of felt that way. I've done a number of other turnarounds then when I said, we really forged our culture. We forged our values. We decided who we were. And we tested ourselves during these challenges. And they're actually better times than when everything's going smoothly. I don't think you can say that to somebody in the abstract or before they really know what you mean and have them believe you. But you learn not to fear downsides. You become actually say, what can I learn from this? What will I learn from this experience? Now, it can happen in lots of ways. So like my brother saying, the best thing that ever happened to me was getting brain cancer because I learned to appreciate every human and every conversation. So it's looking beyond the valley to say, what can I learn from this?
Mm-hmm. And one of the poems you shared in class has really stuck with me about staying in the trough.
Yeah.
Resting in the trough,
Yeah.
meaning like resting in
Yeah.
in the valley that we're in now, because there will be a way out, but not being afraid of where we are now.
Yeah. I learned that from David Dodson, who's another professor here, who's been through a series of challenges, and that poem really meant a lot to him. The one that I always remember is called A Rainy Day by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, that my mom used to say to me whenever I would feel bad about something, and it has a line in it that says something like, into every life some rain must fall, but be above the clouds it is always sunny.
Mm-hmm.
And I think remembering it's always sunny above the clouds. Mm-hmm. It's just we're below the clouds now, and what that means is you got to get above the clouds.
Mm-hmm.
But you can have faith that the sun is shining.
I love those two.
Yeah.
Something that we had to reconcile in your class is, yes, like day-to-day things may be going well, but rain will fall in our lives. And something that you mentioned is like there will be death in our families. That sounds like, it is a really sad statement, but it's a reality.
Everybody loses their parents.
Everybody loses their parents.
Everybody loses their own life. And in many cases you lose siblings or children or whatever, but there can be health challenges.
Yeah.
There can be financial challenges. There can be business challenges, turnaround challenges, a lot of uncertainties. Things are not laid out in an ever-increasing. And I think one of the problems that people have that get into these high-powered schools, they've typically had this never-ending, increasing trajectory that makes everything look great. And many of them, once they hit their first speed bump, they fall apart.
Mm-hmm.
They don't really know what to do with it.
Mm-hmm. One of the stories that you shared in class that has really stuck with me is the one on losing both of your parents at different times and missing the last moments with them.
Yeah.
I think about that quite often.
Yeah.
Could you share a little bit more? Would you be willing to share a little bit more about those moments and what you've learned from those?
Yeah, I remember hearing from my dad that he was in the hospital and would like to see me before he passed away. He knew he was expiring, and so I scheduled a trip. And before I could get there, he was gone, and I just felt terrible. I never got to thank him for all he'd meant to me, everything, all the lessons he'd taught me, and everything. So I just felt terrible. I said, I'll never let this happen again. About 17 years later or so, I got a message that my mother had cancer and probably would only live another 3 or 4 months. I was busy teaching a course here at Stanford, and I thought, well, okay, I'm going to find a time to get there, but I didn't. 12 days later, after the diagnosis, she was gone, and I never got to see her. And nobody ever told me that she was really suffering for a long time before she had the diagnosis. So I missed it for a second time. And I just felt like, how could I, these are the people who've probably formed me more than anybody in life and gave their lives for me. And I didn't say goodbye to either of them or thank either of them. And so I've just always felt guilt. But I've just always felt terrible about that. And that's a little bit of rain in my life, but it will happen in different forms to different people. So anticipate it and realize that these relationships are really where it's at. They're what's important in life.
Yeah, my family lost my grandmother during COVID.
Oh.
And so
From COVID?
Not from COVID, but it was during the pandemic, and so there were all these lockdowns.
Yeah.
And so we weren't able to say goodbye in the way that we had wanted.
Yeah.
And it's quite haunting in that way.
Yeah.
Yeah. And makes me reevaluate the things that matter most to me in this life.
Well, I forget, there was a Harvard study done in the 30s, I think. It was a longitudinal study that started in the 30s and was carried on, and they found that the happiest, most fulfilled people were based in relationships, that maintained high-quality relationships throughout their lives. They had the most sense of peace and self-actualization and everything. Just to say how powerful these connections are. And we cheat ourselves if we don't really invest in these connections.
Absolutely. And that's something that I didn't expect to dive in so deeply into at the GSB.
Right.
But Stanford's curriculum, its students, faculty, administration, I think it's the business school known for more like vulnerability, connection, getting to know one another outside of the baseball stats.
Yeah.
So
it totally is.
Totally
I think it's one of the big differences between Harvard and Stanford is part of it is Stanford is smaller, so it's more intimate, so it's easier to do. But I always tell people that at Harvard Business School, you have a big, thick directory of people, and none of them will call you back if you call them. Stanford, it's much thinner, and they'll all call you back. There's a different connection that happens here.
Definitely. Going back to the people aspect, there's people in our lives that we very much cherish and love. And there are people in our lives who we love, but their rain will fall in our lives and there may be a loss of trust or potentially betrayal. And a concept that you talked about in class is smart trust. Instead of being wholeheartedly trusting and potentially placing trust in the wrong places, you talk about smart trust. Can you elaborate a little bit more on how that came to be and what the concept means to you?
Well, for me, I was just naturally trusting. I mean, the way I was brought up was to just naturally trust people. I was not wary at all. My parents were loving and they trusted me, and so whenever I made a mistake, they would trust me to do the next thing. They didn't beat me up. So I just had this natural instinct to trust. And it took a betrayal or two for me to say, oh my gosh, I've got to be smarter about this. So I started to analyze, what is it about trust? And I said, you shouldn't trust somebody who doesn't have high character, who isn't really competent, and who doesn't have the authority to deliver on promises. So without those three characteristics, trust is actually a recipe for betrayal. And it's kind of a self-betrayal. So I've become much better at saying, wait a minute, are they high character, high competence, and do they have the authority to deliver on promises? And so I've become warier or smarter in how I trust people, but it was through blowing it. I've learned most of my things from making mistakes. I've had to blow it a time or two.
Is that list of, I guess, requirements, is that only in the professional workplace or also in personal friendships as well?
I think in personal friendships as well.
Yeah.
I think trust is, basically the people you trust deliver on promises. And that can be derivative of character. They just will not allow themselves not to deliver on a promise. It can be that they're capable, they're competent, and they can do that, and that they have the authority to do. There's no point in trusting somebody to do something that they can't deliver on. So I think that's the same thing in personal relationships and family relationships. You can love people without fully trusting them. You may have family members, I certainly do, where I love them and I'll help them, but I wouldn't fully trust them to deliver on promises. So you have to be smart about that and only grant trust where it's smart trust, or you will be betrayed.
This part of the lesson, the classes, really meant a lot to me, because I also see myself as someone who's more naturally trusting.
Yeah.
And I've felt, and I share a lot and I'm quite vulnerable with people. And I think when there's an asymmetry in the relationship where I feel that I give more or I'm more trusting of them and, more open, I end up getting hurt most of the time. And so I've felt a few betrayals in my life and loss of trust in that way. So I think I'm still learning what smart trust is. It takes a lot of trial and error.
Well, and the main thing, I think, is not to become embittered. It's easy to feel bitter when you are betrayed, to want to lash out and punish and whatever. And the only way to overcome betrayal is forgiveness. And that's the hardest thing ever, particularly if somebody says, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done that, then it's a lot easier. But many betrayals, people don't recognize it and whatever. And to me, the hardest thing, and yet the most important thing, has been to let go. You can only live life in the future. You can't live it in the past. And so it's like Cortez. You have to burn the boat and move on.
Oh, I love those. Yeah, it'll take me, I think, a few more years and trial and errors to figure it out.
Yeah.
But
It's a hard lesson.
It is. It's part of my rewiring, actually.
Yeah, exactly.
Part of my rewiring of my operating system.
Yeah.
Going back to, I guess, talking about workplace, something that I talk to my guests about on the podcast is about emotions in the workplace. I've cried at work. I've talked to people who've had people who report to them cry at work. What are your thoughts on emotions in the workplace? Do they have a place there? And what is the best way to address them?
So I think there's emotions, and then there's the display of emotion. So we all have emotions, you know, in fact, they almost have a life of their own. You feel angry, you feel whatever, and these feelings well up, and they are real. And so the question is, how demonstrative are you? And I think there are times when it's really fine and appropriate. I've been emotional at times, and, you know, when it's certain things, I can be emotional, and it's okay. It works okay. I don't think you can manage it too much. You know, I know the first few times that I ever wept in front of people, it was just embarrassing to me, and I felt terrible about it, and I apologized and everything, and people said, no, we felt it too. We sensed the feeling. And if they're authentic, they're not being used to manipulate people, and they're not overboard, and they're not too frequent, I think they can be endearing. As I've gotten older, I've become more emotional. I was sitting in a movie, I think I told you guys this, with my wife the other night, and she looked over, there were tears running down my cheeks, and I looked at her, and I saw that she saw that, and I said, I'm sorry. And she said, no, don't feel sorry. Doesn't it feel great? You know, that's really true.
Yeah.
There are moments when just letting go of your emotions just feels great and feels authentic. So I think managed properly, there's probably a place for it.
I'm not my emotions.
I am not my emotions.
But they do need to be managed, or else they will well up.
Yeah.
Especially in environments like the workplace, and with people who care so much about their work and what they do.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Yeah. Joel, in this next chapter of your life, you've written books. You've published one recently. I remember in class we were helping you choose the cover of the book, the cover art. What's next for you?
So I have another book in me that I would like to write. And, you know, you get to a certain age and you feel like I've really experienced some things I'd like to pass on, even if it's only for my kids, my own kids. But I feel like I have 5,000 kids here at Stanford that I've at least crossed paths with. And I want them to at least be able to tap into lessons I've had to learn the hard way. So that's part of it. But we just had our first great-grandchild.
Congratulations.
So I'm eager to get to know this next generation.
Wow.
It's really fun to live life through young people and see if you can help them, influence them, provide a safe harbor. You know, grandparents can do things for kids that parents can't. Parents are just too close to the battlefront. They're too directive, whatever. But grandparents can basically be arms around.
Shower their grandchildren with love in a way that's very different.
Yeah, totally.
Oh, that's so awesome. And it also sounds like you're an avid writer.
I don't know that I'm avid, and I don't know that I'm a very good writer either, but I have this feeling that I need to pass on some lessons, and so I'll do that.
Well, definitely your legacy lives in all of your students that have gotten to know you through classes.
Well, I'd love to take credit for any of them. I mean, they're amazing young people.
Yeah.
I mean, I used to tell my students that I loved them, but it creeped them out. And I said, no, you don't understand. This is like fiduciary duty is the business word for love, but it's really caring about others as much as you care about yourself. It's having a duty to them. And I always said, think about love as a verb, not a noun. So when it's a noun, it's a feeling and whatever. And I think that can betray us and lead us in the wrong place. Whereas it's a verb, you've made a decision. you can love somebody by the way you listen to them, the way you act around them, and you can enrich their lives. And so that's what I mean when I tell students I love them. But I think they're just exceptional.
I love you too, Joel. Love is shown through actions.
It is.
It really is.
Yeah.
Awesome, Joel. Those are all the questions that I have for you. Is there anything that I can help answer in our remaining
Well, I would
minutes?
love to know a little bit about why you came to Stanford, what you've learned here, and what you would change if you were to redo your 2 years. What would you do differently?
Yeah. So I came to school feeling hungry. I had been at my last company. I was at LinkedIn for almost 5 years. And it was, during the pandemic, we had gone remote, and I was feeling like my rate of learning had really slowed down. I wasn't in person with my teams anymore, and I had told my boss, I said, either I'm going to quit and go to a startup, or hopefully I'll get into a business school program. And my boss was very supportive. He wrote my recommendations for school, but I needed a change and I needed to learn something new. Working at a big tech company, I had only one operating system in the professional world, and I needed newness in my life. I was also missing the social element as well. At that point, I had moved in with my mom, which was a phenomenal almost year I had spent with her, and we both really appreciated that time together. But I need to be around new ideas and like-minded people in that way. So that's why I came here.
Yeah.
The biggest lesson that I've learned, it's come up in your class, it's come up in conversations in management, another class, and it's running towards the fire. I wrote about this in my life plan. I am naturally hardwired to be very conflict averse. I grew up believing that conflict is a bad thing. Once a conflict happens, things cannot be repaired.
Right.
And going through our class, conversations in management, touchy-feely, those types of classes have showed me that I shouldn't be afraid of conflict. In fact, I need to run towards them if I'm going to make any progress towards mending or repairing relationships.
It's a great lesson.
And it's a great lesson, and I think it's an attitude that, I will take with me for the rest of my life. Not being afraid of challenge or hard conversations, wherever that might be.
Yeah.
And your last question of what would I do differently? I would take more risk. I've taken a lot of risk over the last 2 years, but in my second year, I've realized that the classes that have stimulated me the most are the ones that I avoided in the first year. I took the real estate investment class. I know nothing about real estate. In fact, I know probably negative about real estate in that I had, these myths and preconceived notions that were absolutely incorrect. And so I was really nervous to take that class. I also took a private equity class this year. I took I'm Just a Bill with Keith Hennessy, which is about policy, U.S. policy.
Sure.
These 3 classes and many more of those, completely out of my wheelhouse, coming from computer science and a technology background. And I was so scared my first year. I was just like, no finance, no accounting. I just pushed it all away. But I've learned that, it's part of running towards the fire. Don't be afraid of those challenges wherever they may come, and really embracing the newness there.
Yeah. Awesome.
That's what I came to do.
What great answers.
Yeah. Thank you for asking those questions. I think we're at time, and this has been an amazing interview.
Well, thank you.
Thank you so much,
Great
Joel.
to be with you, Cherie.
I really appreciate your time, and I know your day is incredibly busy with this new batch of students for the classes.
Yeah, but this is fun.
Is it fun?
This is a break. Thanks so much.
Totally.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Cherie's Corner with Joel Peterson. Before we get to the main takeaways, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you could share this podcast episode with someone who might find this content helpful, I would so appreciate that. Alrighty, let's get to the takeaways. The first takeaway is kind of grim. Rain will fall on our lives. It's a fact. It's going to happen. It's not a pretty thing to think about. Death in the family, hardship at work, layoffs, struggling finances, turnaround, betrayals, the list goes on and on. That's just life. If we can mentally prepare for the tough times that are sure to come in our life, perhaps we can be more resilient. As Joel said, if you haven't really failed before, like egregiously failed before, the first road bump that you're going to hit will probably be pretty tough. The more failures we go through, the more resilient we become. Having a plan of how to handle those future obstacles helps us tackle them when they arrive on our doorstep. How will you overcome your valleys? One very specific way that Joel talks about this is his mantras, which I've borrowed from him. These are phrases that you can remember and repeat in times of hardship. And it also really helps if the mantra that you develop is challenging a limiting belief or a weakness that you have. For example, I take things pretty personally. I'm very sensitive. So if someone that I just met is unkind or rude to me, I tend to think, oh my God, what did I do wrong? Did I say something? Did I offend them? And I end up going through this entire spiral. That's not helpful and it's not healthy. But 9 times out of 10, it's not something that I did or something that I said, and it's just that person having a bad day. So having a mantra like, it's not about me, something that I can remember and repeat when I'm going through that spiral, helps me feel so grounded and so much more free. It's not about me. The second takeaway is this idea of smart trust. I'm naturally trusting, I'm not wary at all. I have a natural instinct to just trust the people around me, and Joel mentioned he's the same way. It took him a betrayal or two to figure out how to implement smart trust. I love his framework of placing trust in people who have demonstrated high character, high competence, and an authority to deliver on promises. In this way, you can trust people but also protect yourself. The third takeaway in this podcast episode is that Joel comes back to this idea of peace and finding peace. In his over 70 years on this earth, he's found that the happiest people are those who maintain relationships, prioritizing the people in their lives who mean the most. I love this idea of finding peace because coming out of business school and being in my late 20s, there's so much tension and so much grinding, so much grit, and so much striving to get to the next big thing in our careers. Quite frankly, there hasn't been much peace, and I feel like that's not something that people my age and my peers prioritize, which is all fine and good in my 20s because I've been building my career. But for this next phase of my life and for my career, I really like this idea of finding inner peace. Like, I'm finally coming to the realization that it doesn't have to be either or. Is there a way to blend it into my life and feel more centered in my everyday? If you guys have any ideas about this, let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. I hope you enjoyed this episode with Joel Peterson. I very much loved it, and I will see you next time. Bye!